This is the Paul Zimnisky Diamond Analytics Podcast. Today's guest, James Campbell. Well, it's great to finally have James Campbell on the show. You're one of my favorite people in the industry. You have such a great passion for the industry. You've been in the diamond business for over 3 decades, 20 years with De Beers. You work directly for Nicky Oppenheimer. You're a geologist, an MBA. You're currently running Botswana Diamonds. It's a London-listed diamond exploration company trading under the symbol BOD. I'll put a link to the company's website in the podcast description. You have exploration assets in Botswana, South Africa, Zimbabwe. You're part of a joint venture that's in the process of acquiring the Ghaghoo mine, which has been on care and maintenance since 2017. So maybe to start, James, could we, perhaps paint a picture of what the industry was like when you were kind of, starting out in your career? And I would love to hear what it was like working for Nicky.
Absolutely, Paul, and thank you so much for having me, and thank you for the very gracious introduction. I went to Royal School of Mines, Imperial College in London, and when at the end of my second year, I was very fortunate to do my honours project on what was later to become Venetia Mine. And when I graduated, there were 3 possibilities of work: either logging, mud logging in the North Sea in a cold and kind of wintry environment, working underground on a gold mine in South Africa, or doing diamond exploration for De Beers. And at that time, De Beers was incredibly strong from a technical perspective, had operations all over the world, had probably some of the best geologists, engineers and people you can kind of think of. So it was almost a no-brainer to actually start working for De Beers. And aside from that, I was very, very fortunate in that my grandfather was the chief accountant for the Central Selling Organization. So when I went to him for advice about what job should I do, he said, there's no choice. Go and work for De Beers. It's the best company to work for. And indeed, Paul, that when I started, it was exactly that. You had a fantastic training ground in exploration with some of the world's top explorers. I started work with Alex van Zyl, for example, the discoverer of Venetia Mine, the Victor Mine, and many other diamond mines around the world. Almost an unsung hero because he worked for De Beers. But you were able to kind of tap in to a huge network of skills and experience with a fantastic career path. So how did that, second part of your question there, Paul, how did that kind of transform into being Nicky Oppenheimer's personal assistant? Well, I was working in Kimberley at what is called the dairy farm, and there was a visit by the HR consultant, Barry Tapson, and being the youngest and most junior member of the executive committee of the dairy farm there, I was delegated to go and, look after, very old-fashioned term, Barry Tapson. And of course, like any good HR person, he asked a lot of questions about myself, and I just recently completed an MBA with distinction from Durham, and I kept that chiefly to myself because De Beers didn't like people doing MBAs because they felt they would actually leave the company. And of course, I didn't. I just felt it was a necessary part of my education. And very shortly thereafter, I got a call from head office saying that I was going to be put onto this multidisciplinary leadership scheme. I was going to go and have to kind of do a test case of negotiating and building a mine in Botswana, which later became known as the Larala mine. And then formidably, I then had to be interviewed by Mrs. Oppenheimer, Mrs. Strilly Oppenheimer, for a potential job as being Nicky's personal assistant. Delighted, of course, that I passed the very formidable test of Strilly and went on to become Nicky's personal assistant. So a little bit about that. What's Nicky like? Well, if I kind of put together maybe a few adjectives, he's humble, he's intuitive, he's got a huge sense of history in terms of his family and the diamond business itself. And I always saw that when he gave a speech and he spoke from the heart, it really resonated with the audience there who, would be equally passionate about diamonds. And maybe if I kind of just give maybe a couple of personal snippets, which I'm sure Nicky wouldn't mind, that there was one time at the World Economic Forum where we went together and I'll probably never be going back there again, but it was wonderful going there with Nicky. And we'd had lots of speeches we listened to. Bill Gates, I remember. I remember Tony Blair from the UK and all sorts of other, very famous people. And I think after the second day, Nicky said, look, this is all a bit much. Let's go and have a quiet pizza somewhere and have a chat. And that's kind of very, very typical of Nicky. And another kind of very typical Nicky thing was that when he presented to the Harvard Business School Global Alumni Conference, and this will kind of resonate with yourself being in America, Paul, and this was before the whole antitrust issue got sorted out by De Beers, and they did very well to do that. And he basically put together a really tongue-in-cheek but challenging speech to America, to this bunch of American audience chiefly. And I think that was the start of kind of chipping away at that long outstanding antitrust thing. But he did it with such a sense of history, such a sense of the future, and also with a lot of humour into something which is actually quite dry and legal. And maybe with my third kind of and final anecdote, because I don't want to bore the audience too much, is that one of the very, very necessary parts of being a personal assistant for Nicky was playing in the NFO 11, his cricket team. I never made the first team or the second team. I was too poor a cricketer for that. But, often when you would go into bat and you didn't do very well, you took the long road around his lovely pavilion in Rankesfontein, just north of Johannesburg, because Mrs. Oppenheimer would give you a piece of her mind if you got out to a bad shot or you were careless in the application of your bat. So it was a wonderful, wonderful 3 years to work with Nicky. And also I was very, very blessed to actually meet his father, Harry Oppenheimer. And one more kind of instance from that is that Professor Deborah Spar, who was the youngest female professor, I think, from Harvard, came to do a case study on De Beers at that time. And this was after the whole antitrust issue had been solved. And she wanted to focus on that and the marketing side. And she went to meet with Harry, and there she was, very full, very formidable as well, and very brash, should I say, in a way. And within 3 minutes, I think Harry had her around his little finger, and they had the most magnificent discussion, and that's now immortalized in the form of a great Harvard Business School case study in terms of, the whole antitrust issue and marketing. And then a final postscript to this is relationships are such an important thing to Nicky. And I'm so thrilled that my wife and I are invited back to his significant events, such as his 50th wedding anniversary, his 70th birthday, and then more recently, or just before COVID, his son Jonathan's 50th birthday too as well.
Wow, I mean, De Beers is such a unique company with such an interesting history, and it's amazing to have been so close, to that for so long, especially with Nicky. I mean, it really is a really cool experience, and it's great that you got to kind of reflect on that and kind of keep in touch. I think that says probably a lot about him. And you're kind of talking about some of the antitrust saga, if you will, which is kind of also unique to this industry. You've kind of worked, throughout that process, and you kind of look at where we are today. Like, what in your mind have been, the most notable changes in the diamond industry, so far in your career? What stands out as maybe the most notable changes, and then maybe kind of where do you see the industry going forward based on your experience?
Paul, it's a very good question. I think there are probably 2 or 3 things I'd like to kind of focus on there. I think from an industry perspective, there's a much greater governance than there was beforehand. We obviously see today very necessary things such as the Kimberley process, the Responsible Jewellery Council, and other organisations which help the consumer understand where diamonds have come from and how much they actually give back to society. And things such as that. And when I started in the industry, and you said over 30 years ago, and it's 33 or 34 years ago, there wasn't things like that. And it was a fairly kind of dark industry. People still think it is that way, but I think it's a lot more transparent than it ever was. And then I think from a company level perspective, there are probably kind of 2 kind of dynamics. And this is not and it's across the kind of diamond industry itself. We see many, many more accountants, legal people, HR professionals, finance people than there were to begin with. I do remember when I started with De Beers in 1985, there were field camps where there could be 30 to 50 people very, very easily, and there may be 5 or more field camps run from the head office in Centurion across the whole of what they used to call the Transvaal. And maybe in head office there would be some administrative person with maybe an assistant accountant behind them. There would be no HR, there would be no additional finance or IT. And then you fast forward to actually when I left De Beers 20 years ago, you'd probably find your field camps are made up of no more than half a dozen people, and your head office will have a number of these different kind of support professionals. And I think the other thing I'd just like to comment on in terms of a change possibly over the 30 years is that when I started with De Beers, and this might sound very ageist, but it's not meant to be this way, and I'm very passionate about this particular point. You were sent into the field to take samples, to look at the geology, to report back on this, and this was a necessary baptism. And you had to do this for years so that you understood field craft itself. And it's something which Alex Van Sale and Bill McKechnie, the last director of geology I worked in for De Beers, will drum into people. And it's something that I hold very passionate about today. And when I now talk to potential graduates in the diamond business, in the geological business, and I hosted a group at Marsfontein, would you believe, at the end of the year before last. It was 40 degrees centigrade and muggy. We walked down to the bottom of the pit and we looked at some of the gravels, and this is my environment, and I loved it, and they could see this. But many of these young 20-year-olds said that they really don't want to be doing this kind of thing when they graduate. And I frankly said to them, well, if you don't enjoy and embrace your field craft and you want to move straight into an air-conditioned office and be a geologist, then frankly you're not going to be a very, very good geologist. And then stepping back a bit more from an industry perspective, when I joined, De Beers was, I hate to use the word dominant, but I will, it was the dominant company to work for. It was the go-to company for diamonds. The Canadian diamond industry had barely even started, if at all. But now what we have, fast forward over 30 years later, De Beers is nowhere near as dominant. Alrosa's very big, Dominion Diamond Corporation, Gem Diamonds, you name it, Lucara Diamond Corporation. There's a whole plethora of other companies now very active in the diamond space. And your final part of your question is, what about the future? Well, during the global financial crisis, there were dozens of juniors operating all over the world. And if I remember in my part of the world, which is Southern Africa or Africa itself, there are at least a dozen, if not more, diamond juniors exploring, doing the kind of work that we are now doing in Botswana Diamonds. But post the global financial crisis, it's sad to say that Botswana Diamonds is the only active diamond explorer listed on the London Stock Exchange AIM market in Southern Africa. And it's quite a mouthful, that is. So what is that going to mean for the future? Well, we all know about the supply-demand gap in the diamond industry itself, and unless there is active exploration, the supply will continue to diminish, and that gap will get wider and wider, which of course is a theoretical gap because diamond prices will catch up. So if people don't spend money on diamond exploration, and I know De Beers spends a fraction of what it actually used to spend, and the funding for diamond exploration juniors such as ourselves is really hard to get, then it means that diamond deposits are not going to be found, and the very long-term future of the natural diamond industry is going to be challenged, or it will get to such a point that funding will eventually flow into it. But that's got to be mindful of the fact that it does take at least 10 years, in the best possible circumstances, from discovery through to production of a commercial diamond resource.
Right, and I did want to get into exploration now. I know that's primarily what you're doing with Botswana Diamonds at the moment. And your point on geologists, it's kind of like a love or hate kind of thing. I think if you aren't into it, it's probably not going to work. But all the geologists that I know seem to be very passionate about it, and they really love their work. And I certainly put you in that camp as well. But I guess maybe we can talk about prospecting for diamonds in Africa. So you have assets in Botswana, South Africa, Zimbabwe. How does it differ by the jurisdiction? And kind of curious what your thoughts are on, new asset development and diamonds. I mean, in recent weeks, we saw Rio Tinto enter into a joint venture with the Angolan government on a greenfield project. El Rosa recently announced a JV in the DRC and the Congo. And as you alluded to, exploration and development in diamonds is down quite a bit from a decade ago. But I think we're starting to see some interest stir up again, I think, which is encouraging, especially when it's the majors.
Geology crosses political borders. I think let me start with that particular point. We're focused on southern Africa, which is part of the Karpfeil and adjoining cratons. So the geology itself obviously does vary from country to country, but does straddle borders as such. So we look at different exploration technologies depending on whether there is cover or where there is not cover. And what I mean by cover is that, you would know that we're very active in the Kalahari of Botswana, and the Kalahari sand can be anything from a few meters to 60 meters thick. And the exploration techniques that we would use there compared to areas where there is very, very limited cover or different geological covers are quite different. Now, for example, if we look at the Kalahari itself, you typically use a lot of airborne techniques such as magnetics, electromagnetics. You would then typically use a lot of ground techniques following up on that, using magnetics, electromagnetics, and then to gravity and those kind of things. And soil sampling, which has found many of the mines in which we're operating on, tends to work obviously a lot better where there is limited cover. Because you can imagine the recovery of kimberlitic indicators through 60 meters of Kalahari sand is very difficult unless you have termites there to actually help you. So you have to look at all those kind of different things. So obviously I think it's a truism to say that many of the easy deposits have been found, because certainly they weren't easy to be found at that particular time. I was very fortunate to listen to the discovery of a Rapa story at celebrate on its anniversary, and there at that particular time, Botswana was almost a remote outpost. It was part of the Bechuanaland Protectorate, and most of it was very, very remote. And the discoverers at that time, the De Beers geologists, were absolutely phenomenal in the work that they were doing and the groundbreaking work that they were doing. So today, what do we have to do? If we keep on repeating the kind of work they did and other workers did 10 or 20 years ago, we're not going to be finding anything. So what do we now have to do? I think firstly, it's a combination of using many of the techniques which are available to you, rather than a kind of a one-size-fits-all using geophysics or sampling. Yes, you have to use geophysics. Yes, you have to use sampling. And then you have to add on things such as thermal imaging, the analysis of satellite spectra data, a detailed analysis of the structural geology. I think that's very, very important, because after all, kimberlites are more often than not structurally controlled, and if you can get an understanding of the structural geology, that'll actually help you a great deal. And then not just that, but then using machine learning and big data or large data techniques to actually help you find those very, very small and discrete targets, which might come from a single grain, for example, in the Kalahari. I think the other aspect that I want to comment on, and you make a very interesting point about the kind of re-emergence of majors coming back into the area. And if we take the assumption, which we made a moment ago, that there is decreasing exploration and there's a widening supply-demand gap, then I think that you'll actually see a re-emergence of some of these old mines, particularly in South Africa, which has got a long history of old mines such as monastery adjacent to the Free State itself, such as a lace mine adjacent to De Beers' Voorspoed, coming back because the price per carat is increasing, and the operational efficiencies you can now get from mining itself through through newer technology have actually improved. So I think it's not just the application of very precise and a multifaceted approach to diamond exploration, but it's also dusting off older projects to looking to see how they will now perform in the different diamond market we have at the moment, and with the advent of new mining and metallurgical technologies.
Right, and I think with, diamond mining, but all mining, it's the economics are fluid, and I think as the cost, to put a mine into production are changing, and as the actual price of the resource at market is changing, the economics are constantly changing. I think you bring up a good point that some of these, maybe mothballed mines or mines that are in care and maintenance will be brought back into production. We saw, we're seeing Burgundy in Australia looking to bring the Ellendale mine back into production. They think they're going to have it up and running again by the end of next year. So I think that's maybe a sign as well. Maybe there'll be more to come there.
Look, absolutely, and also I think it's the other thing that people need to take cognizance of is that there's almost a food chain in mining. That you start with a large company possibly discovering and then putting a mine together, and then once they can't make money out of it, it goes to a mid-tier company which has a different approach, a different management kind of structure. They mine it for a while, and then it goes to the juniors, who have generally a much slimmer management team, could be more innovative, are possibly prepared to take on more technical risk, and then they will actually mine it. And then finally, at the very end, you may find artisanals, or you may find private diamond companies operating assets. And that's certainly what you see a lot of in South Africa, is this kind of food chain of assets, because there is a really active, and it could be a lot more, private diamond mining sector in South Africa, for example, and I hope and pray that that will take place in Botswana too as well, because that's certainly got the capability of doing it, as has Zimbabwe too as well.
Talking about, Botswana and obviously Ghaghoo, it's in the Kalahari Desert. I know that the acquisition's kind of still in process as we speak, but is the goal there to put that mine back into production, or is it just maybe looking at it as an option, and if we see higher diamond prices, maybe at that point it will make more sense?
No, Paul, it's very, very much with a view to your former statement, actually putting the mine back into production. That the Kalahari is our kind of backyard, for want of a better word. Running remote operations in the Kalahari is the kind of thing that we do. So we're very comfortable with operating in that environment, and we see significant potential from replacing the diesel generators with solar power, for example. We see the potential of improving recovery by replacing the current X-ray machines with Tomrow technology. We see improving recovery again by better liberation. And there's certainly a lot of work that's been done in the liberation space in the past 10 years. And then, yes, the market has changed, as we know it has with the advent of synthetics and light box. But we are looking at a diamond production of around $200 per carat. And it does contain fancy stones. Doesn't contain the larger stones, which, like AK6 or Karowe, but the market for those fancy stones and good quality diamonds is good, and it's expected to be robust, and we are looking at a very large resource, something that could have a 20-year mine life, and these kind of things are very, very rare in the world at the moment. So it's an ideal opportunity to try something innovative, just blending that with our kind of deep operational experience too in the Kalahari. So we think it's a great opportunity.
Yeah, I think it's a good example of, like you said, advancements in technology, changing the economics of an asset. And you kind of mentioned the Tomrow sorting technology, and Jeffrey Matterson was actually on the show around this time last year, so if anybody wants to learn more about that. But I think it's a great example of how the industry's embracing technology, and hopefully we'll see that come to fruition with Ghaghoo. Maybe moving on here and switching gears a little bit. I know you're also passionate about ballet. You are the chairman of the Joburg Ballet. It's the largest ballet company in Africa. You're the only person in the diamond industry I know that's also involved with ballet. I've been to the New York Ballet a few times, and my kind of takeaway is it's just this amazing combination of world-class athlete and world-class artist. I think it's completely understandable why there would be interest there, and I think it's very easy to have a tremendous amount of respect for these people that can do this. But kind of curious how you got involved with the ballet at such a high level, and maybe you can talk about that a little bit.
Paul, it's a big change of gear, but a fascinating question. It was really quite simple how I got involved with it, is that before I got married to my wife, she was a ballet teacher in Potchefstroom, which is a small town in the northwest province of South Africa. And one of her very, very first male pupils was a chap called Dirk Badenhorst. And you can imagine, a number of years ago in a very, very conservative Afrikaans town, an Afrikaans male doing ballet. Well, Dirk went on to become the founding chief executive officer of what was then called the South African Ballet Theatre, and Dirk and my wife remained very closely in touch. And once the company formed, he was looking around for directors to actually help lead and guide the company itself. So he had a word with my wife about whether I would do it or not. So my wife said, of course he will do it. So there you go. So I had to leap straight in, and I started off with the trust, and then I went and joined the main board itself. I chaired it for a long period of time. I even was acting managing director for 2 periods of time when there were no managing director, when we were in between managing directors. And then my second daughter was a ballet dancer as well, and she danced briefly with the company. She's now a successful ballet teacher, just like her mother. So I kind of stayed on because of that kind of incentive. So, what are the other additional things that kind of attracted me to it? Well, running a cash-strapped ballet company, because unlike maybe the New York City Ballet, which you've been to, is the South African Ballet Theatre, now the Joburg Ballet, is not really sponsored by the state. You have to rely on income from patrons going to it, and you have to rely on corporate sponsorships as such, because it's really difficult to get money out of the state, because the state has many other priorities such as education, health and things you need to actually kind of focus on. And then one of the things which kind of brought home to me almost the confluence between diamonds and ballet itself is that I was able to persuade our marketing partner in then Rockwell Diacore to go and dance in Botswana and to perform for almost the half of the Botswana cabinet at the Marapuli High School. And it was absolutely tremendous to see the confluence behind Diacore, which markets some of the world's largest diamonds, who are our marketing partner in Rockwell. Myself, I was running Rockwell Diamonds at the time. I was also chairing the Joburg Ballet at that time, and just to look at the absolute delight and passion on these cabinet ministers who just never been to a ballet before, and here they saw this magnificent coordination, discipline, strength, grace, artistry in action. And the combination of that behind, what Diacore do and what we did in Rockwell as well, about, a diamond being forever and a diamond representing perfection and all these kind of things was so kind of strong. And that made me stay in this kind of role for a long period of time. And I was there for actually just under 15 years. I've since resigned from the board because one of my other passions is leadership development. And I continue to be one of the founding directors of Common Purpose South Africa. But there's only a limit to what you can actually do when your day job is Botswana Diamonds. So sadly, I had to kind of step down from that because of increased activity in Botswana Diamonds, and then very strong involvement with Common Purpose, which is now doing work across the whole of Africa too as well.
Time is scarce and life is short, but I think it's great experience to have done something like that at such a high level. And like we said, it seems very different from diamonds, but you kind of found a way to bring it together. So that's very interesting indeed. And thanks for sharing that. But before we tie it up, I wanted to briefly talk about your recent holiday to Tanzania, perhaps one of the most interesting but also underrated travel destinations in the world. It's home to the Serengeti National Park and also Mount Kilimanjaro. Kind of curious what that trip was like.
Paul, it was an absolutely epic trip, and a year before I went, I obviously had to ask my chairman if he would allow me to go for 4.5 weeks on this road trip, and I said, of course, I'll be in touch and do all the things I actually have to do. And in fact, we had a board meeting. We're actually sat under a tree with my computer in one hand and my cell phone in the other, taking the board through the board pack and having a discussion. We covered just over 10,500 kilometers in 4.5 weeks, traveling from my home in Irene, which is close to Johannesburg, through Botswana, through Zambia, through the western side of Tanzania, up through the north, and then down through the east, and then coming home. And for all aside from that 4.5 weeks, we camped. So we made our own food, we slept in our own kind of caravan bed, and we went in a small kind of group. It was a real bucket list experience. Now maybe I'd just like to share with you maybe 2 or 3 of the highlights and 2 or 3 of the kind of interesting challenges. I think I'll do the challenges first. Because this was being done in COVID times, and we went during the course of late May and early June, of course you had COVID tests, and every single time you went through a border you did a COVID test, and I think we did 6 COVID tests in all. Thankfully my wife and I weren't negative, so we managed to kind of complete the whole trip. Because you were taking your own caravan and your own vehicle, some of the borders were incredibly modern. And if I look at the Botswana-Zambia border, for example, going across at Kazangula, you have a one-stop shop where you have the customs on one side of Botswana, customs and immigration on the other side of Zambia. But the paperwork to get your own personal vehicle in could often be a nightmare and could take you sometimes hours to get through. But thank goodness you had runners to actually help kind of shepherd the process through. And then the kind of final challenge is and it's one of these things that I hope the world will kind of sort out in the fullness of time, is that you daren't go on roaming, because roaming is ridiculously expensive. And I really hope that Elon Musk and his low-level satellites comes through fairly shortly on this. So you have to get a local SIM very, very quickly. Data is very cheap once you get a local SIM, because obviously you want to keep in touch, and of course you want to upload photographs. But if I look at some of the highlights, and you certainly touched on the Serengeti, and we were very fortunate to go there in peak season when there wasn't a peak. It was the best time for game viewing, but there was barely anybody there because of COVID. And it's like compressing the Kruger Park into something very, very small. You would go across into a valley and you would see tens of thousands of wildebeest, and you would hear them and you would smell them. And on the margins of those wildebeest, you would see the predators. And, we drove through this to actually not just experience the sight, but the sight of the smells and the sounds of it too. And we were very blessed to actually go up in a balloon too as well, and actually have a look at the leopards and the lions on the periphery of these wildebeest migration, actually looking at the stragglers. So what a tremendous experience. And we camped in one of the public campsites, which has no fences. And the wildebeest just decided to migrate their way. It didn't quite get into the campsite, but they were very, very close. And the sounds during the night and the flies, it was just extraordinary. Right next door to the Serengeti, you've got the Ngorongoro crater, which is actually a caldera, which is again a very, very intense area of absolute beauty and wildlife, which you just have to go to if you go to that part of the world. And the final 2 places I just wanted to touch on, one to me which struck for very different reasons, is a fishing town called Bagamoyo, north of Dar es Salaam. It's got not much to recommend it if you actually go and look and travel documentation, but it was where Livingstone's body left the continent of Africa, and where we got to really experience some fantastic local food, local company, and I still remember to this day I wandered down to the fishing crews as they were going out into the ocean before sun rose, and people thought I was mad. Why am I getting up so early, to watch the sunrise as these fishing folk going across? And it was just an extraordinary experience, chatting to the local people who spoke wonderful English, looking at the sunrise, having a fresh cup of Tanzanian coffee. It was probably equally one of the highlights for me too as well. And the final highlight is we didn't just kind of steam our way through Zambia, but we went to a place called the Kapishia Hot Springs, which is a real beautiful oasis about halfway between Lusaka and the Tanzanian border, which has got magnificent hot springs in the middle of the African bush with a great flowing cold river beside it. And then, would you believe, an English country mansion, which was built by the current owner's great-great-grandfather, because he couldn't build one in England because he couldn't afford one. So it was a magnificent kind of respite from the kind of harsh driving on those really challenging African roads. But Tanzania, like South Africa, is a phenomenal tourist destination. You can obviously fly in there and do the luxury thing if you want to, but equally very safe to drive, but you've got to be up to the African roads because they are challenging.
Wow, what a wonderful experience, and you paint such a beautiful picture with your words. Yeah, and Tanzania should probably be on everybody's travel destination list. It sounds absolutely amazing. Hopefully I'll get there eventually. But James, thank you very much. This was really fun. I'll put a link to Botswana Diamonds website in the description so listeners can check that out. You're also active on Twitter under @JAHC1. It's a nice and short handle, so follow James on Twitter. You regularly post beautiful images from your fieldwork journey. I always enjoy those. I feel like I'm there with you a little bit. Any final thoughts or comments, James, before we tie it up?
No, thank you very much indeed for Paul for having me. I think that a final comment from me is I've been blessed to work in this magnificent industry for over 30 years, 35 years in fact now. And yes, it has gone through some fundamental changes, but I and my board are still as passionate about diamonds as we ever were. And we still believe it's the ultimate store of love. And we still believe it's actually got a wonderful future, because what better way to celebrate a huge event than giving a diamond? And of course, we need to find those new diamond mines.
There you go. I think that's exactly why you're so well liked in this industry. Quickly on my side, please consider subscribing to my monthly diamond industry report. It includes my forecast, data, trend recognition, company updates, everything you need to effectively keep track of what's going on. There's a link to more information on that in the description. You can also reach out to me directly. My contact information is under the About tab on my website, paulzimnisky.com. Until next time, thanks to James. Thanks to everyone for listening. We'll see everybody next time. Please note that the contents of this podcast includes observations and opinions, and the information should not be considered investment or financial advice. Consult your investment professional before making any financial decisions. Paul Zimnisky and the guest does not hold culpability for losses and/or damages arising from the use of this content. Third-party use of the content is only permitted with permission. This has been a Paul Zimnisky Diamond Analytics production. More information can be found at paulzimnisky.com. At the time of recording, Paul Zimnisky had a long equity position in Lucara Diamond Corp., Star Diamond Corp., North Arrow Minerals, and Barrick Gold.